Hello. I've had a few requests to go through the session of this Nemesis rifle that I've redesigned from Apex Legends recently. Yeah, I guess I'll go through it. Kind of, it's not really going to be a tutorial on how to make weapons or this style of weapon. It's more just kind of my process and my approach to making it as a result of making some weird kind of tonal lasery source that I just wanted to get some practice using. Before I make a start, I'll just play through the whole thing. Okay, so that's the whole thing. I guess the first thing to begin with was, or would be, the tonal source that I actually created for this. Let me just change this. So I didn't want to. I kind of wanted to explore getting some interesting lasery type sounds, kind of almost Star Wars esque, but without relying on the kind of 80s style pew pew synthy kind of zaps that we're used to for lasery type stuff. And I mean, to be kind of minute with the detail, it's not actually kind of a laser weapon. This is more of like an electrically charged energy weapon, but I mean, it looks really cool and it's got some nice animations, so I chose to use it. So actually, the source for like the main tonal component for this was just some kind of weird tonal chirpy stuff that I made with phase plant. I didn't actually like to begin with, but that kind of sounds like this. And then I think I was just messing about with it one day in another session and just kind of pitching it up a load. And that kind of sounds a bit more interesting. So I then used Transmutator just to run that through, or to run some gunshots through it and kind of, create the envelope based on explosions and impacts and something a bit more organic to kind of give it a bit more kind of transience and character. And then kind of got stuff like this. So a bit more interesting, kind of quite good as source for these kind of one shots, and especially this like triple burst rifle. I think they were really useful. I think it was kind of this stuff that I used mostly, but hopefully this can all be useful in the future. But it was all kind of an exercise in making interesting source and then actually using it in the context of an asset, for example. So yeah, moving on, I guess I'll start going through each layer. Like with, I mean, people have said 100 million times before, like creating weapons is somewhat subjective, but kind of, I think the best way to start is by creating all of your different layers, like your low end punch layer, the kind of main character of the sound, which I call the body, your mechanical layers, although kind of the main three shots, I don't really have much mech going on. It's more kind of lead-ins and triggers and all this kind of stuff, and obviously all of the body stuff down here. And then what's kind of important for this design specifically was the environment tails. Having that really kind of unique tonal aspect of the body, I wanted it to kind of react to the environment that we're in, these kind of big canyons and stuff. So we'll go through that. That's kind of a pretty cool thing that we managed to get. So yeah, the punch stuff is like really, really simple. Like I didn't want to overblow the low end of this thing because it's more of it's an assault rifle. So I'm trying to think of the context of actually making a game asset. You don't need the punch to be so overwhelming because it will just get really annoying if you're constantly firing off these three shots and it's just you're getting slammed with base the entire time. So it's literally just two layers of quite kind of transient slappy stuff. I think that's just like called it what, weapon punch rifle 556. That's just a bunch of source I made. That's just, yeah, I think it's just a bunch of boom library stuff that I've just processed and kind of put gates on and stuff that are just really useful for this kind of thing. And then like a synthy kick I made in phase plant a while ago that doesn't actually have that much kind of initial transient, but running it through a low end aux up here kind of gives it a bit of sub in the tail, which is quite nice. And something that I think is really useful for weapons is the way I used to do it was you've got your punch layer, your body layer, and whatever, and you're constantly kind of messing around trying to time things differently and move things along the timeline to kind of make it sound a bit more interesting, which does work. It's just quite time consuming. So, I mean, I think I read on the Starfield, the sound effect article. I don't know why I didn't think of doing this before. It's just putting a sample delay on kind of your top folders of your your punch and your body, or you could do it on your master sends for these layers. But I decided to be a bit more granular with it, and just by delaying the sub stuff by 9 ms, it really makes a difference. If I just put the body and the punch together and get rid of the sample delay, kind of doesn't let the punch stuff breathe enough. It's kind of it ends up being quite noisy actually, and you lose a lot of the punch. But if we reactivate this, it kind of lets the body breathe initially first, gets the tonal stuff through, and then you get the kick slamming through, and I think it sounds way more powerful. So that's something I definitely recommend. It's a much quicker process than going through and manually, changing all your layers and timing it in different ways. So that's the punch layer, really, really simple. And then the body layer stuff is kind of where we started to get into the more interesting tonal stuff. So I think this is actually just another version of that body rifle 5.56 stuff that I used earlier. But again, with a rear delay, going through transient shaper, EQ, nothing that fancy really, just kind of eking out a different characteristic out of the same sound. And this is just kind of another sort of more top-end transient thing with a weird tail. Probably not coming through that much, but it does add a lot, I think. Gives it a lot of texture. And I think this is the kind of the main tonal layer. Yeah, so this is all this other stuff that I showed at the beginning, this kind of morphed lasery stuff. Which I think works really well for this. It sounds pretty cool. And obviously, when you're doing like a redesign, for example, you can just use all your variations and kind of put different tails and stuff on it. Not really doing huge amounts of that. Again, just transient shaping and then just inflating that one in particular, just kind of bring it out. And the next layer, yeah, I kind of initially started making the tonal kind of lasery stuff with firework source that I've got. Which is actually quite noisy in this layer, but it kind of, I think it just brings it together a bit maybe. So the body all together, it's kind of nice and transient, nice and full, a bit of noise in there for some power, and then an interesting kind of tonal tail. Again, no crazy processing going on here. It's just kind of carefully selected source with kind of good timings, a bit of delay on that first layer. And then there's kind of it's not the main tails I'm using here. I'm not sure yeah, it's just some kind of weird, almost electrical kind of dispersed synthy stuff, just to kind of finalize that last shot. I'm just slamming it with OTT. I'm not doing anything like crazy. So that's the body layer. And like I said, the mech layer, there's not really a lot going on. I wanted to differentiate the kind of hip fire here with the iron sights. So when we're firing hip fire, we're just using these two layers, which is a really short, I don't know what these even are actually. Yeah, it's from another redesign I did, like the little tank cannon thing and electrical stabs that just kind of lead into almost like a trigger sound to the actual main body, which make it sound way more powerful. And then later on down the line, we add in some more mechanical stuff to kind of give you the closer perspective of the trigger. Yeah, so there's not a huge amount of that going on here. There's the Foley stuff, which isn't really that fancy. It's just a load of mechanical gubbins just to cover what's there. Not really going to go over that. That's just regular sci-fi Foley stuff. So the environment tail is kind of a bit more interesting, I think, because I wanted, like I said, the tonal stuff to be bouncing off of these canyon walls. We've got two things going on, just these kind of regular ballistic tails, kind of quite slappy. Nice wide stereo image. Again, not doing a lot here, just a bit of transgressor to bring out some of the pops and bring the sustain down, and a bit of compression and even more on some of individual layers. This is kind of what you would add to like any gunshot, really. But I think the more interesting stuff is down here, where we've got the more sort of distant reflections and stuff going on. So I'm just running this through another transient master, some convolver, just to give it a bit of space. I don't know what preset that is, but it's, yeah, some of the artificial spaces just to kind of diffuse some of it. And then a bit of EQ and H delay, which I quite like to use for this kind of stuff, just so it kind of bounces around a bit more. And a bit of compression just to squash it all together. But I think the kind of the main part of it is this layer down here, which is actually just this tonal tail up here, which I just rendered out and duplicated down here, and then pitch locked it, and then just slowed it down. So it's kind of the same sound as if it were traveling throughout this environment, which I think sounds a bit more interesting than just having all this ballistic tail stuff going on. So you end up with, yeah, which gives it, you know, it sounds quite interesting, I think. And it's something to think about if you want to make either a redesign, or even if you're just doing assets, think about how the different aspects of the weapon are going to reflect in different environments. It would sound completely different in a forest or a big kind of open space, or even in an urban environment. Thinking about, oh, the tonal stuff's going to be like really audible, bouncing off of windows, cars, or trees, or, you know, in this instance, you know, these big cliffs and stuff. So that's kind of each layer individually. Oh, I think I missed the first stuff. This was a bit, I don't know, it's just a kick and some more electrical stuff. But I think adding this kind of pre-kick kind of helps. It's kind of how with a burst fire weapon, or like any weapon really, if you were to render it out, stick it into wires or Fmod or whatever you're going to use, having that first shot be slightly more powerful than the rest of the shots in the sequence kind of makes especially a burst weapon really satisfying to fire. So I kind of mirrored that in Reaper, just putting a bit of a slammed kick at the start. It's just being compressed a bit. I'm just limiting it. But I would probably usually just end up doing this in wires rather than trying to design it here. Just make kind of a really transient sound just to put on top of the first shot, or even just in like a sequence container, just have the first shot plus, you know, plus 3 dB or something. So that's kind of what that's doing. And then a little bit later on, when we get into the iron sight stuff, there's just a bit more of it on the tail. So yeah, that's kind of it really. The rest of it's just layering it up, choosing different variations, using a bit of variator just to, well, not variator in this case, because we need the timings to roughly be the same, but, you know, using Reaper just to scroll through, find some different variations, and just get, yeah, all the different things that you want. That's kind of it, as I was saying. I think the way I like to do redesigns is to have kind of a beginning and an end goal. The beginning being, oh, what kind of source can I get something interesting out of? And then after this, I'll go and then, I think I've done it here, just render out different stems, essentially, of like the whole thing here. And then like the punch layers and stuff. And then the reload on its own, so we can reuse that for assets in the future, or just little bits and bobs here and there, little servo sounds and gas escapes. It's all really, really useful. We should save everything you do in a redesign, whether it's, well, like including the entire mix and all these little bits, because I end up using them all over the place. Because you spend so long, you know, making all this cool stuff, you might as well use it, right? But yeah, I won't blabber on. That's essentially the entire thing. But I hope that kind of gave some insight into how you could maybe approach something similar to this. But obviously, you should find your own ways of getting some cool source, or, you know, try and morph tonal content with other stuff that isn't just a gunshot or an explosion. And then how could you use that for like flybys or whooshes or anything like that? But yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks for checking this out, and see you next time.